Grab some popcorn and a favorite chair. The love of movies is why we're here. Press play and don't delay. Let's Phil be our guide to a cinematic day. Phil at the movies, from the silver screen to his podcast stream. Phil's covering every movie dream. Phil at the movies. Phil at the movies.
And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Phil at the Movies. I am, of course, your host, Phil Walsh, and you were listening to show number 179 of this ongoing podcast that is, you guessed it, for the love of movies. And if you're watching this episode on YouTube, you can probably tell by both my background and my guest's background that we're going to be talking about a shark movie today. And for those of you listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, you probably can guess based on the musical cues that open today's episode. So needless to say, everybody, we are still in the midst of summer. And with Jaws' re-release for the 50th anniversary happening next weekend, I thought it would be appropriate to kick off the pandemonium, if you will, the excitement, the shark of it all, by talking about one of the more interesting entries in the Jaws franchise. This, of course, is Jaws 3, or as it was released at the time, Jaws 3D. But joining me here today, I am delighted to be welcoming back to the show for the first time, and it's been a minute, so glad to have you back, Mr. Jay Skipworth. Welcome back, my friend. How are you today?
Phil, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back on. It's always fun to talk movies with you, and particularly to get to talk about a movie that has been in my life for as long as I can remember. And I'm old enough to know that. But this is the first of two Jaws movies I've seen in theaters. And I'll tell more of that story later. Though I'm going to get to remedy that. I finally get to see the big one this year in a theater, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, well, I look forward to your reaction on that one because that, as anyone who's listened to this show knows, any chance I can see Jaws on the big screen, I jump at that. But I'd be really excited for your first time experience with it because it is something to say the least. Let me give a quick plug, everybody, if you haven't done so already. If you could rate and review this podcast on Apple, it certainly helps with the pesky algorithm, as well as sharing it with your family, your friends, anybody who thinks may need some cinematic philosophy, if you will, in their lives. Would certainly greatly appreciate it, as well as following Jay's show, Film Strip Podcast. They do fantastic stuff over there. I've been a guest a few times, and it's certainly one of those podcasts where every time you guys drop a new episode, I have to stop everything, and it makes for a better day for me. So I always appreciate what you guys do over there.
I appreciate you saying that, Phil. And thanks for plugging the show. We have a lot of fun at Film Strip. My co-host Ron and Lindsay and I just keep this thing going, kind of like for the love of podcasting about movies. I think was what our line should be now. We've been doing it for so long, but we love having you on and other friends, and then sometimes just chopping it up with each other about whatever we're interested in at the time. But we've got a little bit of everything in the archives, including the Jaws retrospective many years ago. Nick and I did that, so you can go back and listen to those. And I have lots of thoughts about Jaws in general as a franchise, and particularly Jaws 3 and all that kind of stuff. But we have a lot of fun on Film Strip, and I appreciate that. I feel the same way every Friday. It's exciting to see what you're going to be dropping, especially with the things that have been coming out recently. And I was really jazzed to hear you and the guys on DC Unlimited when Superman came out this summer, and so really enjoyed that and enjoyed the variety in the discussion. I think that's always fair and fun, and but it's a good time, and really looking forward to talking about this one with you. So.
Well, I was going to say I couldn't think of a better person to bring on to talk about this film, which is now over 40 years old, which is quite impressive. This movie's been with us 40 years. But I remember you saying back some time ago that if ever I covered Jaws 3, you wanted to to be
Yeah.
a candidate for it. And so I thought this would be the perfect time to revisit this film because for some reason the 40th anniversary came and went, and it just wasn't on. I didn't have it on the schedule. So we're making up for lost time, if you will. We're going into the third dimension,
Yes.
if you will. So just a
Yes.
little recap if maybe you are unfamiliar with Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D. I know certainly, there's a lot of varied opinions when it comes to Jaws sequels, and we can certainly get into that later on. But this, of course, was the third entry in the film franchise that, of course, began with Steven Spielberg's classic 1975 film. This one, of course, stars Dennis Quaid, Bess Armstrong, Louis Gossett Jr., rest in peace, Simon McCorduncale, Leah Thompson, and John Putch. This movie continues the storyline from the previous two films. We are still with the Brody family, though this time without Chief Martin Brody. Roy Scheider famously said, I'm paraphrasing it, but the devil himself couldn't make me do this film, and he made certain that he would be unavailable when Jaws 3 went into production.
Famously, he was doing Blue Thunder, which
That's
happens to
it.
be one of my favorite techno thrillers of the '80s, and a good film, and something we revisited not that long ago on Film Strip, and talked about that as part of it. But yeah,
No, certainly Roy Scheider's um, uh, role within this franchise is legendary, and certainly
yeah.
by this point. But this one, of course, does continue with the Brody sons, Sean and Michael. We are no longer on the island of Amity, or in real life, Martha's Vineyard, but this time down in Florida at SeaWorld, no less, or some variation of SeaWorld. It's kind of interesting. For those of you who have maybe been to SeaWorld, you will astutely note that there is no live body of ocean right near the park.
Yeah.
It's right kind of inland in I think it's Orlando.
Orlando is
Yeah.
is Central Florida,
I was
so
going to say, yeah. So I mean, unless the great white shark is finding a way to go on land. Maybe it's a land
yeah,
shark, to borrow the old
it's
SNL
yeah,
thing.
it's I think that was part of the initial joke, but yeah, so
So no, again, that's again a lot of creative liberties going on with this one, but the premise of the film, of course, involves the Brody sons, Sean and Michael, down there in Florida, where they are once again forced to confront a great white shark. This one, a 35-foot great white shark, no less, and her baby to boot, as it invades the undersea kingdom of SeaWorld, putting everyone and their lives in danger. Now, a little bit of background on this film because, again, Jaws 2 comes out in 1978. It's nowhere near as financially successful or critically successful, but it was still well received. It did well enough to at least warrant discussions of a continuation of the franchise. But there's sort of two interesting trains of thought with this film. Originally, the producers, David Brown and Richard Zanuck, had proposed or at least thought about doing a spoof movie in the vein of Airplane
hmm
and others. I think Animal House even. I think even maybe John Hughes may have been involved in some capacity, or at least was in a discussion with regards to the script. But the title, which I actually quite like, was going to be Jaws 3 People Zero, and more or less was going to spoof the first film, the second one, as well as a couple other movies that were prominent of that time. But it was going to be a spin-off, a send-up, if you will, of the entire Jaws series up until that point. But uh, for what I mean, there was a lot of reasons. I think Steven Spielberg sort of intervened, and there was a lot of thought of I believe the quote was fouling their nest based on the sort of the stature of the first film. But I think even David Brown said years later, we just should have fouled our nest and done it and had a great time. What do you think, Jay, of this original idea?
I think it was the way to go. I mean, they had already done the they if you watch Jaws 2 from this perspective real quick, Halloween is kind of considered to be the kickoff of the slasher genre of the 1980s, even though it came out in 1978, right? But I would posit to you that everything that is a trope about Jaws and a lot of things that are a trope about slasher movies are all in Jaws 2. It's really a slasher movie. Like if Jaws 1 is a drama with a shark in it, Jaws 2 is a slasher to the point that they mark the shark the whole nine, and it's a big ball of fun. Where else can you go after that? You got to go comedy.
Mhm.
And he's never admitted it to it, and he probably never will, because Spielberg's a proud man. He did stop that from happening by threatening to like bail, which he was going to anyway, a few years later. But he was going to leave, and they didn't want him to go. And I posit to you, if 1941 had not bombed his great comedy
Oh
idea,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think he would have been more in line with this. I think he one didn't want them to spoof the thing that at that point had been his most successful turn, because Close Encounters was good and people liked it, but it didn't do
it
what
wasn't Jaws.
it wasn't Jaws, exactly. And 1941 had not worked
No.
for audiences, and I don't know the last time you've revisited that, but there's a reason. Uh, and I don't think he wanted them to do a comedy off of the heels of what he had built. But they were right in thinking we need to go the airplane route.
Yeah.
What's funny is Airplane is a spoof of 70s disaster films.
Right.
And we will come back to that theme later on because they didn't completely abandon the idea when they eventually got around to this one. But I think it was the right idea to do something outlandishly different and to have fun with it at this point. 1980s cinema was starting to turn from what the 70s had been, which was anti-heroes and kind of dark and very drama, because of a little movie called Star Wars and its two sequels that had completely changed the way we looked at blockbusters.
That's right.
We wanted to have fun in cinemas, and I think the idea was right, and then the fact that they to come back years later and say we probably should have done that makes you realize that even Zanuck and Brown knew like we should do this, but they ended up selling out of this, and they weren't even involved in the production in this one, so they just moved on to something else at Universal.
Yeah, it's a fascinating what if, because I have read excerpts from the script, and from by all accounts it was quite entertaining. I think the opening began with a stand-in for Peter Benchley, or maybe they were
It was going to be
get
him.
Peter, but yeah,
He
maybe
was going to
that's
do
what-
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And the idea of him being in a swimming pool and the shark somehow getting him, like, I mean, that's
Yeah.
hilarious, and
Mhm.
for those of you who have seen 1941, Spielberg even sort of recreates the opening to Jaws at the beginning, right down to the fact you have Susan Backline appearing, kind of an homage to Chrissy from the first film. So it's easy to see what they could have done. I get it probably at the time might have been a little too far or too close to home for Spielberg, and certainly, maybe it wouldn't have found its audience at that particular time. I think it's fair to say that it probably would have aged better than ultimately this film has. Just sort of looking at the longevity of it, but it's a fascinating what if, because the idea is certainly there, and I respect, again, you gotta break the mold a little bit in a way, just like how the first Jaws was.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to keep doing a thing, you have to eventually reinvent your formula along the way. It's funny to me that like these two major franchises, we talked about Halloween earlier and Jaws now, that by the time they got to the third chapter, they all realized we can't just do what we've done.
Right.
They just happened to pick the exact wrong thing to keep going in the direction they should have gone in with that, and I know Halloween 3 has its fans now and things
Oh,
like
sure.
that, but I can assure you, as someone who grew up when that movie came out, it was not liked by anyone for a long, long time. So,
I mean, there's a reason why, again, not making any, comparison in terms of quality here, but there's a reason why the fourth films in both the Jaws and Halloween franchises,
Go
respectively,
back
kind of go
to the-
exactly.
yeah, they're going to dial that way back in, and they bring back the cat, all the stuff. Yeah, you're right, and that's what's funny about this one, because it is a big leap. The funny thing about it is, and you've already mentioned it, they decide we got to get out of the Northeast. Let's go to Florida. We're already shooting in Florida anyway. They shot most of Jaws 2 in Florida anyway,
Yeah.
because the water actually was pretty bad on the electronics. At least it was just better weather. And
Right.
I mean, that's what they decided. Like the Gulf, much easier to deal with.
Right.
And then they sort of left in the tongue in cheek idea of like, Well, people that have been to SeaWorld know it's in Orlando, but this you got to remember this is way before the internet.
Yeah.
So most people think Florida's all ocean anyway, so it's probably okay,
Right.
and nobody's going to care. And they didn't, nobody bothered. And if they did, then they'll get the joke, you
Right.
know. and
Right.
and
Right.
I appreciate that. I said before, this has been in my life as I can remember. There were two times that summer my entire family went to the cinema together in 1983, Phil. We all had gone to see Return of the Jedi together because we were a Star Wars house. We had seen I did not see the original one in theaters. I did see Empire Strikes Back as a very, very young child, and then saw Return of the Jedi. I was really old enough to know what was going on, and enjoyed that. So we did that, and then we went opening night, and that used to just be Friday nights. People, we went opening night as a family. I have distinct memories of standing in line outside of Hickory Hills Cinema in Florence, Alabama, with this huge Jaws 3D like banner out in front of that place in a line to get in to see this movie. It was a packed theater. And we went as a family and had this big time as the first 3D movie I'd ever seen. I think I kept the glasses for years after because they had like a shark on them, and all that. And it was an experience. I remember seeing this in theaters and like reacting to it when it happened. And then this is way before the advent of VHS. It was years later I would ever get a copy of this on a tape to watch again, and then the DVD and all the other ways of owning it now. But seeing it if you see it now, and I would say this to people that maybe have watched this recently or whatever, you see the ones on Peacock, they have done a tremendous job cleaning it up. When
Mm.
they first released this to video, back in those days, there were two kinds of 3D that you made. And this kind and Friday the 13th 3D were made on the kind of camera where when you cut it down for video, you took half of one lens. So it was incredibly grainy. It was really, really bad. It was overexposed in a lot of ways. So it didn't look good for years. Now it looks really good. And I would tell people what you watch on Peacock or, in your Blu-ray or whatever is what I saw when I saw it in a theater. It was an incredibly great looking movie for a 3D movie at the time.
No, I remember my first experience with this film was on a VHS tape, and I mean, I was again, like with a lot of things, was younger, seeing a lot of this stuff probably that I should have. But I remember even thinking at the time, like, this is kind of crappy looking. Like just the
Right.
the quality
It just
was
looked
just not
bad.
yeah, but
Yeah.
you're exactly right. Rewatching it just recently, you can see the difference in uh just the detail. It's almost as if we're back in 1983. So I agree with that assessment of it. It is funny because 3D was a really a gimmick that kind of came in the 1950s and wore itself out relatively quickly, but it made a resurgence in the 1980s as sort of a fun throwback. And again, we mentioned Friday the 13th, part three. So of course it made sense for Jaws to go and be in 3D. The
Yeah.
third dimension is terror, or in terror, I think was the tagline,
Right.
something kind of cheesy like that. Um, the film itself, because there's also been some accounts of a different script written by, I believe it was Richard Matheson.
Yeah.
Um,
Science
and
fiction writer, very well known. Yeah.
yeah, and from what I understand, more or less what we get in this film is what he conceived, the idea of a shark being trapped inside of an aquarium like setting, there being the baby shark. But Carl Gottlieb, who wrote or was responsible for penning the second film and did a lot of writing on the original film, as well as playing the character of Meadows in that movie, he came in and sort of did a script doctoring and polished this film up and kind of streamlined it. From what I understand, Richard Matheson was pretty disappointed by the overall quality of this film because it did, well, the idea is there, the original vision that he had kind of went out the window in favor of just being a straight A to Z popcorn movie with some 3D effects. I don't know if you've had any time or any chance to sort of peruse what was the original script and if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, you go back to Gurdon Trueblood, who's really kind of the when they settled on we're not going to do a parody, we're going to do a straight film on this. He's the one that came up with the get it in an enclosed space again. And the fake out of, he said, I don't know why you didn't do it in part two. You should have two sharks. You have the one shark he thinks really responsible for everything, but only to find out, no, it's this mammoth thing that's even worse than anything you can imagine. And then Matheson came in and gave that a very serious treatment and a lot of tried to infuse a lot of what was known at the time as science in it, but infused a lot of what we would call good science fantasy as part of it. The Brody characters weren't as pronounced. I don't think they were as involved. There was a lot more. There was going to be like a showdown with an orca, which is funny enough. When they made the Jaws video game for PlayStation 2 years later, they built that in there as part of that. I don't know if you ever had a chance to do that one, but it's a fun watch through if you want to do that on YouTube or Twitch or something. And I played it. It was pretty wild. Like you had to get the shark and like open key card doors. It was wild. But it was all the jokes. But Matheson had built all that out, and then they brought in Carl Gottlieb to say, we got to make this into a movie that's more or less 95 minutes long. Can you do that? Like, can you make this and make it enough of we got to bring in these characters that we know who they are, but we got to get them aged up a little bit. They got to have jobs that would put them in these situations. So he knew enough to know, well, if you're gonna do SeaWorld, there's people that build that. We'll make Brody an engineer, and his girlfriend will be one of the SeaWorld marine biologists. Why not, right? And so he built all that, and he built the idea and this is really what Gottlieb brought to it, is he realized, well, if we're not going to do a spoof like Airplane, and as I mentioned before, Airplane's a spoof of 70s disaster movies. Well, let's just make Jaws a disaster movie, but instead of like a fire, like the Towering Inferno, or a hurricane, or an airplane going down, or whatever, Airport 77, all those things, the shark will be the disaster, but it'll be the big shark, and that'll be the surprise. And so he wrote an ensemble cast because they couldn't get any big stars for this. Louis Gossett Jr. is the biggest star in this thing, coming off the Oscar win for Officer and a Gentleman, a tremendous performance. But as we know, it's different for black actors. They finally get paid when they win an Oscar. At least back in these days, they did. And so Lou was like, "Sure, I'll do it," and came in and he said, "We have to have all the things we have in a Jaws movie. We got to have Brody's, but we're not gonna have the chief of police or all that. So we got to have Brody's, and we got to have some a bureaucratic official who's just obsessed with money. That's gonna be Lou Gossett Jr.'s character, and we got to have a Quint style person, but we're not gonna get anybody as cool as Quint. So let's get Sir Dies Soon in a raft." And they got Simon Corkindale, who was a great get and is such a character as a person, and went on and had a great career in television and film, and he died way too young, but had presence and understood the assignment of, I'm here to basically be like the bounty hunter but with a camera, idea. And that's a trope that gets played in a lot of films. You could imagine like he's kind of a Muldoon type in Jurassic Park or any of those, he's those archetypes. And we're going to put all those people in this park, and we're going to have a pretty girl. They got this unknown actress named Leah Thompson from this Tom Cruise movie nobody saw. But this was her break. That like she had all the right moves, and then all of a sudden she was in Back to the Future, and stardom forever. And they got all these people together to do that, and Gottlieb's the one that put all that together. And what he wrote, and then what they ultimately were able to shoot and get out of it, even changed more too, because Joe Alves had helped build the Sharks and run them the first two times. And he was still involved in building this one. And he said, I'm kind of like Brody and Jaws too. He's like, I know what that hell is, and I don't intend to go through it again. Let me tell you what we're actually going to be able to do with miniatures and all that kind of stuff. And based off of that, that's where they get it. The funniest credit in this to me, Phil, and I haven't been able to find out how much he got paid for it, but I'd love to know. It says like suggested by the novel Jaws, written by Peter Benchley. I was like, there's nothing about that novel even remotely connected to this except a character named Mike Brody. Like that's about it. And a shark.
Yeah, that I chuckled seeing that because it's like, yeah, I'm really sure, Peter Benchley, it was up, hours at night, funneling off ideas to Carl Gottlieb for this script. I mean, I'm sure he lost, many a good sleep over it. No,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you summed it up quite perfectly because there's there's always the idea of making the movie and then getting the movie made. And I think sometimes people think they're the same, but it's really not. What goes into the script and what you actually shoot, 9 out of 10. I mean, unless we're talking about a Christopher Nolan film, like more or less, they are going to be varying degrees of difference, and I think that's interesting because particularly with a film like this, you already have an existing franchise. You have two successful films. You have one monumental film. So at this point, you're cashing in on the name of it all. I mean, this could have
Oh
just
yeah.
been, Jaws 3, and frankly, could have had nobody, associated with the Brodies or whatnot, and people still would have shown up to it because it's a Jaws movie. I think by this point, it had invaded the pop culture where everybody was aware of the shark.
Yeah, Jaws and Jaws 2 were staples on cable television. That's where I saw them, up until years later when there was a rental market and all that kind of stuff. I thought Jaws had commercial breaks in it. Like, but I didn't know any better as a kid. And same with Jaws 2. So when they were, I had seen Jaws 2 on like the Sunday night movie of the week or whatever, because I'd seen Jaws at probably way too young an age, but that's neither here nor there. And so my folks were like, yeah, this is cool. My brother was almost a teenager at this point. So he was down for it. And my folks remembered the 3D craze of the 50s and early 60s because that's when they were kids and dating and all that. And so they said, yeah, this will be fun. And it was an adventure, I mean, again, you didn't have exposure to media the way we do now. And so this was I mean, I saw Jaws 3, Phil, and my memories of it for years were just based off of that theatrical experience until I saw it on television again and could kind of reconnect half of it. And now I've seen it, because I own it and all that kind of stuff. I've seen it in a lot of different ways, but it's funny to think about a time like that, but this is a movie that really exists because it was an event movie. And when you walked away from it, the only way to really experience it was to go to it again. I mean, it made almost $90 million on less than 20 million, on a budget. It made money. I mean, all four of these movies made money. And even though it got panned, at that point, the Universal had decided we don't really care we're not trying to make The Godfather here. Like we're trying to make, a summer movie because they had invented the summer movie with Jaws and then had it stolen from them by George Lucas. And so, at least that's how they feel about it. And everything else that had happened since, I mean, you're talking about from 1975 to 1983, movies changed a lot, and the way we consume movies changed a lot.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're only 8 years out from the original Jaws, but of course, by now we've had Star Wars. I mean, well, at this point, you would have had the entire Star Wars trilogy. You had
Yeah,
this
it just wrapped up.
Yeah, you had the invention of it was still playing at the time.
Mhm.
You had the invention of the modern day blockbuster. So the environment was ripe. You couldn't have made Jaws 3 in the place of Jaws 2. You needed that second film to be the bridge in order to say, yes, this is the next part of this franchise.
What's wild about this, and it's something that I heard another commentator somewhere along the way through the years say this, and it just stuck with me. He said, everyone always said that like the worst thing about Jaws and Jaws 2 is that they vilified the shark. It made it a villain. When truthfully, we know sharks don't operate like that. The sharks don't take things personally. Um, and in this movie, the shark only kills like the super bad people, and he doesn't really hurt anybody else until the very, very end when it gets pissed and goes through the glass. And I've always found that to be I've never thought about it much growing up, but years later looking at it when we reviewed it on Film Strip, we talked about how like why does this movie not have an insane body count? Like it should, but it's like there's a fish, and then there's some like jewel thieves. And then there's that jerk that, can take a flying leap at a rolling donut on a gravel driveway, which is a phrase I still use to this day. That's one of the best tell-offs of all time. There's that. And then, Leah Thompson's leg. And up until the very end, that's kind of it. So,
Well, no, and interestingly enough, Louis Gossett's character, and we're getting a little bit ahead of everybody, so spoilers if you haven't seen the film, but his character of Bouchard, he was originally supposed to die in the film.
yeah, he was
But
supposed to
they,
get it.
yeah, but they liked him, and again, he's probably one of the best characters, if not the best character in the film, just in
Oh,
terms of just a personality.
he is giving such a wild performance in
He
this.
he knows what film he's in.
Yeah, he has said later, he said, I played this as if I was a carny barker.
Yeah.
He said, who had somehow come into enough money to do this. He said, and as a black man in the 80s, that would have seemed very far-fetched. He said, so I made up this whole backstory for this guy that he had like car washes and fast food restaurants, and all of a sudden he parlayed it all into this. And he kind of had everything and sunk into it, and he wasn't going to let it go down. You know? And but he was a hustler, is the way he played it. And I thought, that's exactly the way to read Burchard. And Bess Armstrong says he was so much fun. Said she just enjoyed being, she's done a few scenes with him. She really enjoyed working with him.
No, he's definitely one of the standouts in this film, and it's if you sort of wanted to read into the archetypes of the previous two Jaws movies, he sort of gets the redemptive arc that Larry Vaughn does not get. He does get it if you see the deleted scenes from Jaws 2, but it did feel like there was some unfinished business with at least that character type, which I certainly appreciated. Just again, especially playing with playing by an actor of this of magnitude,
Yeah.
it felt right and kind of appropriate.
The other thing I'll say too is I like the idea that they gave Mike Brody like a grown-up job that actually exists in the world. Being a structural engineer is a real thing. Dennis Quaid at this time is almost 30 years old. He doesn't look it, but he is. My friend Stuart from Now Playing Podcast, which I'm so glad he's doing better now. Shout out to Stu. Once called Dennis Quaid the dime store Harrison Ford, and I've never been able to forget that because he's dead on with that, and he really is. And if you watch Dennis Quaid now with that in mind, you'll never look at him the same.
Wow, I am going to cash that one in because that right there. Wow, that's every Dennis Quaid movie now. Okay.
He really is. He really is that. But I years later in life worked at a school, had a big engineering program, and of course, being a movie nerd, I always would ask like, what would somebody have to do to be this? All this stuff. And I once asked someone about this who had actually seen it, and they said, that's the funny thing about that movie. They're pretty dead on with what that guy's job would have been like. That they would have probably found a guy who was young but wasn't too young, had enough experience to do something crazy enough to build like an underwater thing. You have to find somebody young enough who isn't scared of losing their pension in their life, to do this. And I always thought that was interesting that they found like age appropriate actors to play the jobs that they were in. Because Bess Armstrong is actually older than Dennis Quaid, so she's I would buy her as a PhD marine biologist, and apparently she learned how to actually ride the orcas, which, if you know about them now, seems really scary and amazing. I think Liz that's in there and the guy Danny, they're the real ones, and they just put them in the movie because they felt like they had good personalities. So
Yeah, I remember reading that somewhere that they were actually from the
yeah,
from
but they
Super.
said that like she took to it, like it was kind of wild how good she was with it. And I'm a Gen X, so I've had a crush on Bess Armstrong since this movie. But she was on My So-Called Life, and I was supposed to fall in love with Claire Danes, but I was kind of way more into her mom, so because I knew her from this movie. So, but and another movie, a kind of a forgotten Tom Hanks drama called Nothing in Common. She plays
Oh
opposite
yeah.
him in that, and it's actually a really good performance. I tell people all the time, like, go watch that because Tom Hanks went back to doing comedy for a few years after that because that movie bombed. But it's a great Jackie Gleason performance, and it's a tough family drama. But Hanks is awesome, and like you see him there, and you go like, this is a guy that's going to win Oscars because you just
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there. The movie wasn't completely there, but it was there with him. But neither way, like I appreciated the fact that they had age appropriate actors in like real jobs and doing things that the real people would do. They weren't doing some fantastical version of it, you know. And as
Right.
somebody who has an older brother, the way Mike and Sean react to each other as young adults is very much the way my brother and I had a relationship when we were both in our 20s. When I was still in college, he was out of college. It was just fun to see that. I've always related to that and found it funny years later that I kind of lived it a little bit. We didn't run around with a shark in a park, but similar adventures.
Close enough, right? No, that's the thing about this movie. Everybody has a role to play, but you really hit the nail on the head. it's realistic. I mean, the film is beyond a farce in a lot of ways,
Oh yeah.
but the characters, at least in terms of their occupations, I mean, you could imagine under a different circumstance, Brody or Mike would have been, a police deputy,
Hmm.
following in his father's footsteps. And you could even imagine a scenario where it's Sean and Michael against the shark at the very end. Whereas, in this film, Sean goes off with Kelly. Like, I mean, that's the end. We don't see him in the climax, which again, I think, it you could argue, well, it's more, thrilling and exciting if there was more of a, Brody showdown. But like, that's I think kind of I guess you could say the hidden beauty of this, that there
Well,
was that
the
attention to detail in a way where
yeah,
it's
that's
not
Carl. That's
forced.
Carl Gottlieb. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, like I said, he knew he was trying to write a disaster movie. And the thing about all those disaster movies, particularly the ones that came out like after Airport and all that, they or even Towering Inferno, if they had a big star in it, like Heston or one of those, um, when you build an ensemble cast, you have to have people that can disappear into the role and just bring you in with it. So they've got to feel like real people that you would know and interact with. And the secret of this movie, and this is something I'll say to you that I don't think I've ever said on the podcast before, is this is not the Brody's movie. The main character of this is actually Catherine and flanked by Brouchard. And Mike Brody is kind of along for the ride in a lot of ways. He does a lot of stuff and he has a lot to do in the movie. Sean is definitely just along for the ride. But Catherine's your main character in this movie. If you watch it, she drives a lot of what happens. And,
Really, the tension in the movie stems from Catherine and Bouchard. I mean, you look at their
mhm.
sort of opposing views. He's the businessman, she's the marine biologist, and he's looking at it strictly from an economic standpoint. She's looking at it from an ecological standpoint. Yeah, no, I would agree with that assessment. This is not a Brody movie, even though they are I guess, the cell, if you will, or the sort of the hole in which to find the story for this movie. It really is her film. It's Calvin's film,
Mhm.
and it's sort of, you know, Brody. I mean, definitely, he does stuff, but again, they're both sort of there just for, for sort of shits and giggles, if
Well,
you
yeah,
will.
they're there for the continuity of
Yeah.
the story, if you will, but everything Mike does is a function of his job. He would have to do this if they just sprung a leak. Like everything Catherine is doing is because she knows things the audience doesn't know yet.
Mhm.
And she's telling the audience that we see the bigger shark sort of, but we don't really until she tells us all about it. When they find the body of the guy that's been chewed up, they think it got killed by the small shark that's now died in the park. We can get to that in a minute too. But when she goes into the under the sea restaurant with Calvin and everybody having drinks, and she says, "This is a shark with a mouth, like a yard across." And the guy's like, "That'd be like a 35-foot shark. Are you crazy, lady?" And then it swims up to the to the glass as if to say, "Hello, I'm here." Because that's what you do in a disaster movie. That 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 is when I realized, like, this is Catherine's movie. Like, she is the one driving the story. Mike just has to react to things the whole time. You
That's
know.
right. No, I mean, talk about an announcement. I mean, again, by this point, we have seen the shark in obviously the famous moment in the first Jaws with Roy Scheider on the boat. Though technically, we do sort of get that preview in the estuary with with the guy in the rowboat.
Yeah.
Jaws 2, of course. The shark was heavily promoted. It gets scarred, which was
Mhm.
an
I mean,
interesting
it gets
little.
that great coming alongside of the boat and it tries to snap one of the kids,
Yeah, no.
and
So, like, what do you do at this point? And
yeah.
I was actually kind of amazed because it's been a while since I have seen this movie. We really don't see much of the shark. I mean, yes, there's the
No.
mystery aspect of it, but like, it's only like maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Like, it's
Hmm.
really the baby shark driving it. I mean, we kind of guess that there's something else going on at the beginning, but it's not until the start of the third act that we finally get a view of the shark.
Well, that's when you realize who the real like villain
Yeah.
is, or like
Yeah.
what the real danger is that baby shark gets trapped in the lagoon,
Right.
which is where the dolphins play and stuff, and they think it has attacked these other things. It's made these problems. It has wrecked a gate, but we realized that later on that was the mother that wrecked the gate because she, came inside the park, had the. If you know anything about sharks, this what's so funny about this. And this is what is dumb about this movie is once the sharks are born, it's like peace, see ya,
Goodbye.
and then,
Yeah.
yeah, they're gone. So the shark's not pissed about that at all. It's mostly just being a huge shark, but the fact that we think that the baby shark is the one causing all the havoc, and when they finally they're down in the little undersea submarine thing and it attacks them, which is a wild scene. I mean, the shark like hits and moves backwards. It's crazy. It looks like a ride. It's such a joke. But they shoot it and they bring it in and all this stuff, and they're trying to walk it around in a pool, which is insane. And they're doing the things that anybody that's ever tried to do this, and that's a real thing. Like people have tried to keep great whites in captivity forever, and they'll never do it successfully for very long because they don't respond well to like enclosed space
Right.
very well. I remember reading and it's a great article when I was a Boy Scout in the Boys Life magazine about a guy who had to like walk a shark that they had caught a great white in an aquarium at night, and he got detached from it and didn't. I mean, was just horrified at what because he didn't have any lights. What was happening, and he heard something thud in the background as he was swimming up, and he got out, and they realized that the shark had gotten into a frenzy and it basically rammed itself into the wall trying to get out, and it drowned itself doing that. It killed itself inadvertently. But it was that you read that story, and I encourage anybody to go Google it. You can find it. It's a heart pounding read, especially for a kid, but even as an adult. But I read that, and then saw this movie again years later, and I always thought about them trying to keep that shark going. The times it kind of gets a little wonky and stuff. You're led to believe that like that's the shark problem. Then the scientists let you know, oh no, it's a lot worse. It's a whole lot worse. But you're right. The big mama shark only shows up in the third act, and is really there just to get trapped by Simon McCorkindale and to get him stuck in her teeth.
Yeah, it really, it shows how long it's been. The shark is really just a plot device by this point, which
It's the fire, it's the airplane,
exactly,
it's the tornado, all these things. Yeah.
which I mean, it's certainly it's a difference from the previous two films, where of course we're only dealing with one shark, but the shark is so integral to the storyline. It's that menace that's out there. Whereas, again, if you do look at this film, it's still a monster movie, but the shark, I think you make a good point. There is more of a, I can almost say like a humanity to it all. There's much more of a, well, maybe everybody else is the problem here, the businessman, the Sea World Enterprise, Again, you make a good point. Everybody who dies in this film, more or less, is not a great person. I mean,
Everybody except Fred, the poor
yeah,
nephew
Freddie,
at the
he's
end.
the one. Yeah, no, he's kind of.
Fred did not deserve that.
No, he
but-
didn't. Just, I guess, instead of Calvin, they had to kill one more person. But
Yeah, they killed the other black guy.
Yeah,
sadly,
which,
but,
you know.
I mean, it's the trope for a reason. So, but I mean, they had to kill somebody, and they needed to kill there at the very end because it had been a minute. I do love though that the whole thing that Bess Armstrong goes on, and I've always remembered that speech. I feel like she just gets so impassioned about it. Is that like no, the baby was caught inside the park. Oberman was killed inside the park. The shark's mother is still inside the park. The idea that like if you got that bit and shark, the largest shark, supposedly great white shark ever measured in the world in like the 1870s in Australia was around the size of this shark.
Yeah.
If they get this big, we don't see them, and probably for the good of it. Let's just be honest. But the idea of what if you got a 35-foot great white shark stuck in an amusement park? Now that's funny on one hand because it goes back to the comedy root of this, but it's also like that is an insane proposition. And what would it do? It would probably cause mass panic, which is basically what happens in the third act of this movie.
Oh no, I mean this is where everything goes to hell in a handbasket. I mean the
Yeah.
shark, of course, reveals itself, and it goes to the undersea kingdom. And I remember this was sort of like the big hype for this film, like the shark cracks into the glass on the aquarium wall. And I remember as a kid being just excited and terrified at the same time because, like, you know, by this point, I had been to a couple of aquariums, so like, you'd seen that setting, and it's like, okay, well, what if a shark actually did that? Like, oh,
Yeah.
holy shit here.
I know. Well, I always think about it too. Those like poor little park guides. I'm like, some summer intern, like she deserves like money for life for keeping everyone calm, and being very like. I was like, well, you're well trained, or just the calmest person on the planet. I don't know, but yeah, I was always impressed by that because it is that's the ticking clock. It's like they're trapped in there. There's only so much air. We got to fix it. We got to get them out. Brody's got to do engineering shit, which is basically welding underwater and patching things. But they got, I mean, like he explains it all. It's like, we got to patch it. We got to put pressure in. We got to get the water out, and then the people can go. And I mean, like there's a whole logic to it, but there's also like a time crunch with it, which everybody could feel. Like I remember my dad, who worked in power production at the time, telling me like that sometimes it feels like that, when you've got a fire here, but you got to get this going. We got to, and it's one thing after another. And I don't know. I found that to be really interesting as they play it out, because if you try to play this seriously, if they tried to play it, and that's what I say, like Simon McCorkindale, Bess Armstrong, Lou Gossett Jr. I don't think Dennis Quaid knew what movie he was in. To his own recollection, he doesn't remember making it
Right,
because,
right.
as Rick James said, cocaine's a hell of a drug. Leah Thompson said she had a good time water skiing, but she was a kid. Everybody else understood what they were doing, and they said, we have to play this like melodrama. We have to play this like a big joke. And apparently, Joe Alves told them all, play it like a soap opera. Like we have to sell people on that, because if we try to play it straight, we're going to get laughed out of the theater. And he wasn't wrong.
No, he's exactly right about that. It would be interesting had another director. I mean, you think of, at the time, like, a Harold Ramis or someone had directed this with a little bit more,
John Landis probably would have done it.
comedy chops or finesse. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
Much respect to Joe Alves, but I mean, he was not
No, that's not what he did.
No,
Yeah.
this was not his forte. But he was wise enough to make that call, because, yeah, the other two films, even though, you could poke holes at Jaws too, they're more or less played serious. And again,
Well,
that's a testament to the actors and the tone they were going for.
I mean, Jaws is a story about an island that gets thrown into a tragedy, and then three men who couldn't be more different from one another, who have to solve it together. And really, the one at the center of it is the one who's afraid of water. That's the joke. And then the second one is, what if nobody believed that guy when it happened again, and they turn on him for it? And you see that, right? And so this movie is like, we're not going to do any of that, because we already done that. So we just need to make it about the destruction, and how do you survive the destruction? You have to be witty and think on your feet. And I mean, there's that whole thing when they're going after the first shark and they're getting ready to dive, and Simon McCorkindale and his partner, Jack Tate, played by P.H. Moriarty, who they did not tell that man to soften that accent at all, and I love them for it, because you don't understand half the things he's saying. He's almost like a Muppet.
I had to put the subtitles on just for some of his stuff. Like, what is he saying?
Even then, it didn't help. It's Cockney slang.
Yeah.
But the fact that he and Simon McCorkindale's character have such a rapport. I've seen all the internet things, like him and Fitzroyce are like actual couple or whatever. You can go there if you want to. I don't care. They're partners. They work together. They know each other. They have a shorthand with each other. And that's what's so neat, is when you get character actors. What I mean by that is people that can just disappear into roles or whatever. They just pull you in to do that. A lot of these people had done stage work, and you can tell, because that's the kind of actor that can do that. They can just sort of make you believe things. But when they're having that whole argument about, I've got grenades, no, you can't use them, we don't, and we're like, that's like Chekhov's shark grenade. Like, obviously, that's going to play a role somewhere down the line. The fact that Fitzroyce has to be sacrificed for that to make that work, is, I don't know. It's funny. I mean, maybe if we're Star Trek fans, maybe we can tie him into the red shirt, theory. He did wear the red suit because that's going to attract the sharks, which is complete and total bullshit because sharks can't see that well at all. It's about smell. But anyway, but for an audience in 1983 who's in this kind of popcorn movie, sure, the guy wearing red's going to attract the big shark. He's also got the grenades. So why not? I mean,
Oh,
it's silly. That I want to be clear. This movie is silly as hell,
oh
but
God, yeah.
but it is fun in the same light.
No, that's the thing, and like I would posit, if this movie was not called Jaws 3, if it wasn't attached to the Jaws franchise, if this was just
Death at SeaWorld.
Death at SeaWorld, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
Shark versus SeaWorld, like I think in a lot of ways it probably would have even found a bigger audience, if that makes sense, because when you're coming on the heels of Jaws 2, I think people almost expect it to be a certain way. And I think the only thing that probably really saved this thing was the 3D effect.
Yeah. Having it
Because,
come at you like that. Yeah.
yeah, I can imagine for an audience, especially at that time, it would have been an out of this world experience. I'm like, oh my God, there's the shark. Like, there's our
I mean,
nightmare come to life.
the shot that has maligned this movie more than anything is the last one when the shark is coming toward the central hub and it's not really moving, it's just gliding, and it wrecks like an airplane into the hangar or
And then it
whatever.
stops.
Yeah, and then stops or whatever. But I can tell you, Phil, as someone who sat in the theater when that thing was coming at us, nobody was worried that the tail wasn't moving. All they saw was that big ass shark coming straight out of the screen at you. And when it came at you and you didn't notice that it stopped, it looked like it was still coming with all that glass and all that water. It was one of those like back in the seat, like again, as little kid, I distinctly remember all four of us going sitting straight back when that happened. So it's cheesy looking now. You can make fun of it, and it should be because it is pretty bad. But at the time, it was the best they had, and it looked pretty awesome.
Well, no, and you have to think. I mean, I certainly have thought this, and I've never seen it confirmed officially, but I have to imagine there was some thinking with Deep Blue Sea when the guy gets he's on the gurney and the shark has it, but he throws it right into the.
That
There's no
whole
way.
movie
Oh,
is
that's
an
basically
homage to
yeah.
this, yeah, these movies. But yeah,
Yeah. I just remember say that for the first. I'm like, this has got to be a Jaws 3 knock something
yeah,
rip off
when they
somewhere.
throw Stellan Skarsgård through
Yeah.
the glass, that's exactly what this is. I mean, well, look, Deep Blue Sea began as Jaws 5 in one of its many iterations. It was going to be Jaws 5, and that just was never going to happen. And that, they moved off of it and turned it into what it is. And it is a pretty cheesy but fun movie to watch. But it's sort of like a spiritual sequel in the Jaws world, if you want to say. But it began in as, oh, let's try to do Jaws again, but nobody was going to do that. This movie does operate on some wild logic with that. But I mean, think of what just think on the movie's logic level where we've seen the shark do at that point. It has announced itself at that. Broussard has talked about like we have this bubble screen. The sharks don't like that. It keeps them away. Well, that big one goes right through it anyway because it's like, I don't care, And then it really doesn't care when it just hits that glass and traps all those people. It's attacked the water skiers. It's wrecked that whole situation. It's made sure that John Putch got to go to the hospital with Leah Thompson, which good call. And then it goes for its ultimate coup de grace. It just rams itself right into the central hub of the thing, which just being an adult for a minute with it, like I'm just thinking about the amount of damage that has been done to this park in Broussard, and if like the insurance claims alone are going to take years to unravel.
I mean,
this
SeaWorld
park
is
is
probably
ruined.
gone. Yeah,
Yeah. This park. Well, that's why they moved to Orlando, right?
Right.
Yeah. And no more ocean. Yeah. I mean, it's over at this point for them.
This was beta SeaWorld.
Yeah, right. I mean, you think it's Isla Sorna or whatever
Right.
nonsense the Jurassic.
That's right. Test Site B or something.
Yeah, Test Site B3 or whatever other nonsense they're coming up with in that series. But it's that same idea, right? Is that in a disaster movie there has to be like collateral damage. There has to be damage. You know, the Poseidon Adventure, that ship is not working anymore.
No.
You know, so I mean, like we're not doing that. So you have to wreck a lot of stuff to make it believable and or you know at least live in some bit of reality. So I appreciate the fact that the sharks whole MO is I'm trapped in a small space. I'm very large. I'm going to crash everything. And I'm going to do so very quickly because it's just not going to take long because I'm obviously not long for this earth. So
It is a
um,
Jaws movie after
it
all.
is a Jaws movie. It's got to go down in some way, you know. And but I mean, there's some good tension with it. They do a pretty good job with. Oddly enough, like I feel like this Alan Parker does a really good job with the score. Like they didn't get John Williams back for this. He did the sequel, but I felt like the score more or less stayed in true form with Jaws.
It reminds me of some of the later versions of the Halloween score, where the musical cues are there, but it sort of becomes its own thing, but
Yeah.
still works within whatever story that we're telling. No, I kind of like, especially with the way this film opens, we get the Universal logo, and instead of getting the the dun 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 dun, it's a much more almost like an ominous organ sound, but kind of like cues of Jaws, but not as in your face, if you will.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, and but I think it works again because it feels like park music. It feels like an
Right.
amusement park. You know, that's the whole thing, and um, more or less that works. You know, and I don't know. I find that part of it to still work as part of a Jaws film. They all have a different motif, you know,
Yeah.
musically, and this one fits its style. You know, even though it's, I mean, again, it's like you say, it's like those mid Halloween sequels. You know, how Alan Howarth, I think, did a lot of that work and stuff, and he does a pretty good job with it. You know, doing the Carpenter work. It's not the same because we did get Carpenter back for Halloween scores later, which is pretty. It may be my favorite thing about the 2018 Halloween is the redo score, but you know, I feel like it's still in the vein of you know it works
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah.
Um,
It gets the job done.
I was going to ask you what did you think though about the end of it and the way that they dispatch the shark and how all that goes down with the whole grenade sequence and all that and Cindy and Sandy who we haven't talked about at all, the real
Well,
stars of the show.
right. Oh, yeah. The dolphins, the singing dolphins. Yeah. Again, by this point, we've blown the shark up with an air tank. We've electrocuted it with an undersea cable. So what is left at this point? I mean, I'm still waiting for what was the original ending for Jaws 2, where the shark was going to get a boat propeller down on its mouth. I'm waiting for that to happen on the big screen at some point. Maybe in the inevitable Jaws 5, I don't know. But yeah, this is it fits with the whole wackiness and zany quality of the film. Like, yeah, the diver, the photographer, he has grenades on him. So of course that's going to somehow work itself into it because I mean, I've known a few photographers in my life and they all carry a stash of grenades in their camera
Sure.
bag. Now it's par for the course, you know, you're underwater. Um
Yeah.
I love how they um Mike and Catherine just hide like under a steel desk or something as if that's somehow going to shield them from the explosion of the shark. And I will say it's probably my favorite effect in the film, just seeing that explosion. I would have loved to have witnessed that in 3D because it's certainly, again, you want to have a big rousing ending. Again, certainly never going to recapture the original or even Jaws 2, but for the time and for its effect, I love the way the shark goes out. And again, just to get that final shot of the shark's jaw just sort of broken up before it sinks to the bottom was really a nice touch.
Oh, it was. And look, again, it's talking about something coming at you in the theater. That was, I mean, I remembered that hanging, it looked like it hanging right in front of me, you know, in the theater. It was a heck of a shot. You know, it looks goofy now, but this is a goofy ass movie.
Oh
It
yeah.
should have a goofy ending. Like it's like you say, we've done the inexplicable air tank explosion, you know, which still works. You've done the crazy electrocution and catching on fire, which is wild to see, but it's a great visual effect. That shark burning like that is, pretty. I mean, the shark is sort of scarred by fire, and it ultimately goes down by fire. And
Right.
also, there's no power on Amity ever again.
No.
Martha's Vineyard is blacked out for years. But in
Really
this
blame Brody now.
Right, but like I do think about like, okay, that grenade explodes and does that amount of damage, but yet everybody's like Calvin and the other woman swim away,
They make it
so
out.
they're alive. But like somehow the two scientists aren't dead from the concuss of that. Now I can believe it would do that kind of damage because the idea of I go back to that scene in Armageddon where that guy's like, if you light a firecracker in your open hand, you burn your hand, you close your fist, you wipes open your ketchup bottles the rest of your life. So like the idea of okay, in an enclosed space, maybe it would do that damage, maybe it wouldn't. But I feel like the movie honestly had earned it at that point because it's also like a testament to Fitzroy's who was right to begin with that yes, we should keep grenades and yes, they are useful. And I will show you with the last thing I have on this earth that it's still useful because the guy, when he gets eaten, like goes down fighting. He's stabbing his way through the shark. It's almost like he realizes I'm going to be eaten, so I'm going to make sure I wedge myself in here with my one last Ahab's moment here for you to get, and I hope Brody doesn't suck at hooking a grenade through a mouth. So it's a wild skill, but
Put that on the resume. My God. I mean, again, I think as he says, we have to do is pull the pin, which of course is done to a T. I mean, I will posit still a much more realistic ending than ramming a shark with a boat and somehow causing it to miraculously explode. So,
yeah, it's. I mean, yeah, or killing it with a helicopter, or
right.
it's. I mean, there's lots of goofy ways to kill a shark. It's way more plausible than what happens at either end of Jaws: The Revenge, whichever one of those you
Well,
see.
exactly. Pick your poison.
Yeah, which is that's a whole other thing. But it's more of an homage to the end of the first one again, which I'm fine with. I feel like the movie earned that because it needed that big thing. What I do find kind of wild is that the two resident dolphins are
Oh,
still alive, and we have to end with them like doing a dance. That felt
yeah,
like SeaWorld demanded the commercial at the end of this.
that to me is probably one of my biggest nitpicks with this whole film. The dolphins,
Yeah, they
Cindy
suck.
and they
Yeah,
do, they really do. Honestly, I think they
yeah,
were nominated for a Razzie.
and they
Which
deserved it. They
they
should have
did
won.
because, like, first up the noises, and they're always around. But then, yeah, the end of the movie, which a Jaws film ending with a freeze frame was certainly a choice. But then to have it be with the dolphins, it's like, okay, might as well said paid for by SeaWorld.
Yes, but promotional consideration by the following. Well, I mean, Coca-Cola was all over that second Jaws movie,
Right.
so I guess we had to throw the bone, with it. But I, I, I mean, the idea initially was like we talked about, with the earlier scripts was it was going to be like so dark and violent that it was going to be rated R. There was no way Universal was going to do that because Jaws is a PG movie, wildly enough. Um, and Jaws 2 was a PG movie, and we didn't have PG-13 yet. So this was going to be a PG movie. Like they had to do it, so the violence had to be containable
Right.
enough, and all the other stuff that we could do.
Temple
The
of
mo-
Doom is still years away.
yeah, yeah. Well, Red Dawn,
Yeah.
and those kind of things. Which that movie, the fact that movie got by with PG-13 is
Nothing
blows
short of a
my mind.
miracle.
That movie is violent as hell and super dark, but that's another day on Donahue, as they say.
Right.
You know what? The most unbelievable thing, besides the dolphins of this, though, is that one, a dude like Sean could pull a girl like Kelly, or that he would have the ability to like withstand her in any way. Like he rebuffs her at every turn. This girl is trying to sleep with him the entire movie and never does when she gets
No.
bitten by a shark. So
No, I
trying to
mean,
impress this fool. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they said he was, going to school in Colorado, but like, too much time on the island, I think, for old Sean there,
oh man, I mean like, dude, you grew up in New England. You're at college out west. this girl's probably from like, Defuniak Springs, in town for the summer internship or whatever.
She's a water skier.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
and she's gorgeous and she's way into you. And she can
And
play
you're
your
just
stupid bar game better than you. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, it's the most unbelievable thing in this movie.
it really honestly it is like, okay, let's have Sean's head examined or something.
That or the fact that I mean I get that she keeps going back to him because it's a tale old as time that women I can fix him. I'm like no you can't. So and what's funny is the way that they do try to allude to the fact that these two kids have been through traumatic stuff in their lives. Especially like the second one, like Sean should be screwed up because if you remember, the most obliterating kill in any Jaws movie is that woman that helps him get back on the boat, and then the
Right.
shark just destroys
Chomps,
her
yeah.
in front of him. It is one of the it's Janot Swartz's best shot of that movie, and he dreamed it up. He said we need to have this shark absolutely disappear somebody in front of us, and they wanted it. They shot it from both angles, and they realized that the behind one with the sound effect was the way to go, and he's dead on right. Because poor Marge just gets destroyed. If you saw that, yeah, you might not ever get in the water again. But I think Kellyanne might talk you into it, at least into that little beach area right there.
I think that's a persuasive argument.
I mean, they do
Just a touch.
They do have some fun talking about like that's what you get working at your childhood phobias, and all that stuff. Like that's the thing is this movie's all built on that stuff, and I can see why maybe you don't want to go for it if if you came for something else. But I promise you, the disaster is right around the corner. The shark will be there, and when it comes, it's plenty in it.
Oh, that's the thing. Like the movie never forgets what its main job is, which is to, yeah, the Brodies are there just for sort of added measure, but this is a shark wrecking the hell out of SeaWorld. And that, again, that's the whole point. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. This is a disaster movie with a shark. I mean, think Towering Inferno, think Earthquake, think Airplane 77 or Airport 77. Like it's all together with this movie, and it strangely works. Now, again, is this the greatest Jaws sequel? I don't think so. It's arguably not even a great film, like just on the merits of it. Like it's just sort of a wacky. It's clearly 1983, but you have to respect at least what they were going for.
It's a movie that unfortunately is the product of its compromised beginnings. They wanted to do a spoof and a comedy, and they couldn't. And then they tried to do something sort of hyper dark and weird, and they didn't want to do that either. So they split the difference and made a disaster movie that's kind of a parody, but it's sort of a sly one. And it just doesn't all congeal. It's like it can't decide what it wants to be. It's sometimes you watch, sports teams and they've got all these, really interesting players, but they don't ever really pull it together. Like they just sort of muddle their way to being mediocre. The Steelers' existence for the most part in our lifetime, or the Cowboys, something like that. It's like this great historic franchise, but they just kind of always seem to, they're never terrible, but they're also never like great either. And this movie's the same thing, is it doesn't have enough stuff and enough people involved with it anymore to push it completely over the line. That said, it doesn't completely fail either, because I would argue that buried inside of its 98-minute runtime, there's about a 45-minute swing of things that is really, really fun. And it mostly starts from when the shark shows up at the restaurant till the very end, and until before Cindy and Sandy at the end. Everything right there is pretty fun. Like that's the best part of the movie. The rest of it, vacuum the house, dust, and then come back.
Right. No, seriously. I mean, that's why I really think you take out the Jaws title, and it's a better film in that sense. It works more than trying to be the third entry in an established franchise. I mean, this is clearly a case of franchise-itis, and we're just doing it because this is the business model of the day.
Right. This is what we do, right? We're trying to make the third one. And I mean, we talked about it. Return of the Jedi is still in theaters at this point. It's
Right.
still raking in money, hand over fist over this, So it won a weekend or two, and then it hung
It went
around
away. Yeah,
and went away. But back in those days, man, movies stayed in theaters a long time, as long as
that's
they
right.
could, unless they were just absolute bombs. Because you had to get something back, and there was no secondary market. The secondary market was to sell it to television, which
Right.
was going to be NBC, or something like that, or ABC down the line, and we weren't there yet. Like we didn't think about there was no home market.
Hmm.
We weren't there. We were the last Jaws movie was at the cusp of when that was taking off, in our lives. So it's a different. It's hard to apply like modern sensibilities of success on a movie to this because it was a way different time. It just worked differently.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we sort of look at it from a modern standpoint. We say, "Oh, well, this movie was a failure. It made, nothing compared to the second film. Its critical reception is abysmal. This was a disaster, on steroids." But you're exactly right. Context is key here. The film did respectable numbers compared to its budget. And I mean, for better and probably for worse, it did guarantee an ultimate sequel. So I mean, it did its job. And again, I
Yeah.
think that's
Y-
yeah, more than you could say for some movies at this
Yeah, you,
point.
you hit the nail on its head. It did its job, as the third one in a franchise. We already talked about Halloween 3 is a fine work for what it is, but it did not do its job. I mean, it killed it dead in the water because they didn't do the anthology ever again, after that. And they probably should have, but even though I love those middle sequels, we've talked about that before. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. Friday the 13th 3 did what it was supposed to do because they made the next one right after it. Like they
Right.
just kept churning. That was a different, franchise. But this one, it worked, but it also didn't because you can tell the people behind it when they went back to do the next one said, we can't do that again. We got to go back to the basics. And then they made the choices that they made, which maybe someday maybe at Christmas time we'll come back and
Right.
talk about that. It's a little more appropriate
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say this, Phil, that in no way should you ever hold up Jaws 3 to Jaws, other than it comes from that. But it can still be fun. It's kind of the same way some of those middle Hellraiser sequels are pretty bad on their own, and compared to the first two, really they are. But there's some of them that are better than others. Like that, I tell people all the time the Scott Derrickson one Inferno is actually pretty good. It's pretty watchable. The one of the ones with Kirsty later on, where she's with Dean Winters, who everybody knows from the Mayhem insurance commercials and stuff, is pretty good. It's pretty watchable. It's not anywhere near those first two movies, and nothing to that 2022 one that Hulu did. But it works. It's fine. It's maybe the same way I feel about Shane Black's The Predator. That has nothing on that first movie at all, and it's got nothing on Prey. But it's kind of dumb and fun. If you just want to have some dumb fun with a Predator, here you go.
That's the thing. It's a fun creature feature. And really, of all the Jaws movies, even though they are somewhat part of the monster subgenre, this one to me feels the most at home. And maybe that's because it's going back to the sort of the 1950s with the 3D effect, the fact that we're putting the beast inside of a setting. It feels more natural, if you will, whereas the first two Jaws films have a much more both dramatic quality and just kind of a man versus nature sort of undercurrent, whereas this is clearly just out to be a fun time at the movies.
It's out to be an amusement park ride. The irony of being sit in the amusement park is the joke. Like that's the thing. It's just a ride. I tell people all the time, you can't compare the work that a band like Poison does to the Beatles, but they exist for different purposes. And one of those bands is, well, I mean, the one's a lot older than the other one, but Poison's still pretty popular today. They still sell out concerts and people still listen to that music. It does its purpose because it knows what it is. Like the guys in that band know what they are and they just do their thing and don't worry about the rest of it. Jaws 3 is the same way. It doesn't ask you to take it seriously. It asks you to have a good time. And if you're there to have fun, you can have some fun with it.
Oh no, that's the thing. I mean, people, like to dump on this movie. I think, for sort of the humor of it all, but I mean, compared to what comes, what came after this one, I mean,
Yeah.
nobody is talking about Jaws 3. Nobody talks about Jaws 3 the way Michael Caine talks about Jaws the Revenge.
No,
Let's
not at
put it
all.
that way.
The Jaws movies have that interesting, like perfect downward slope of
Seriously.
franchise of quality that is rarely achieved. Usually it's an up and down, but like there's Jaws and then there's Jaws 2, then there's Jaws 3, and then there's Jaws the Revenge, which you talk about a movie that could have been something way cooler and they just didn't do it. But they go down in a straight angle. I mean, it's a good 45-degree
No,
slide.
it's a remarkable achievement because you're exactly right. It doesn't happen a lot with any movie franchise. It ebbs and flows. I guess that's what makes Jaws that much more special.
Yeah, you realize how good it is after you watch what came from it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
then everything that it spawned. I mean, think about.
Oh,
I mean, you got some real great features like piranha and
mhm.
alligator and
Orca.
the
Yeah,
orca's its own like
that's its own.
special
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, that movie's got stuff happening
yeah.
in it. But that's another one for another day probably. But I don't know. I just feel like again it for what it is.
Yeah.
There's some fun to be had here, and I think part of that is I know where it goes,
Right.
but also just in and of itself. And I think part of it, and I'll cop to this. I was very young when I saw this. Jaws had already made a huge impression on me, and seeing this in a theater.
Mhm.
I don't remember a lot about my childhood and things like that, and not for any trauma reasons. I'm old. I just don't remember a lot, but I remember this. Like
Mhm.
and I remember as a family going to a movie theater together was a big deal.
Mhm.
And when we did this together, I remember it distinctly, and I still think about it today. I was talking to my dad earlier this week, and I mentioned this to him, and he remembered. He's like, "Oh yeah, we all went and saw that, didn't we?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh God," he said, "I think I remember that." Now, of course, he hasn't seen this movie since it happened, but since that time. But I remember that, and so that's part of my nostalgia for it
Mhm.
and I'll cop to that. But I still think again there's some fun to be had here, and I would ask your audience if they were to revisit this, to do so. It's a good movie to watch, not in the summertime. Watch Jaws and Jaws 2 in the summertime. Those are your summertime Jaws movies.
Yeah.
Watch this one in like the dead of February when it's
Yeah.
cold and wet and you're tired of being stuck inside because it's a sunny, bright, fun movie. It'll pass you a good Sunday afternoon when your team, the Steelers or the Cowboys, is out of the playoffs or whatever. So that I mean, it's a good way to pass a day and watch it through the lens of it's a disaster movie.
Right.
I think it'll give you, it's a 70s disaster movie. It'll give you a little bit more of appreciation for it.
Yeah. Now, my first time seeing this, actually, it's funny that you mentioned it, was actually in mid-March. I actually remember getting it, of all things, in my Easter basket that year. When one of those weird times when Easter falls in March, and I remember pulling it out and watching it that night, after Easter dinner, and watching it and just thinking, oh my God, summer's right around the corner. So no, you are spot on with that. It really is a good a good film to watch in the midst of a winter, right before the onset of spring. But final thoughts, Jay. What particular scene or scenes stand out to you from this film? Because
Oh,
there are memorable moments, to
th-
say the least.
there are. I think when, like I said, that sequence when the shark starts creating mayhem in the park, the way the fin works, and you think it's going to get those water skiers, and then it goes after the bumper boats, and then it crashes into the aquarium when it's just causing all hell to break loose, is a lot of fun. I do think the chase of the baby shark is actually pretty good and pretty well done. There's some good action in that, with everybody. That's fun. And for as goofy as it is, the explosive ending is a memorable thing. You'll never forget seeing that when you see it. So I would say those things are the ones that really stand out to me.
Yeah, probably I would reiterate the the capture of the baby shark, that feels the closest to, I mean, again, it's not on the same level, but it feels like we're in the same franchise as the previous two movies. Just the way that is shot, the tension, the music, it's very well done. Um, I remember I've always enjoyed the actually the first discovery of the baby shark. That's another moment where it's just kind of, yeah, because it does sort of catch you by surprise. And then, of course, just that explosive ending. I mean, that to me is still seared in my memory. I would love to see a 3D print of it just to experience the shark jaws flying at me at the end.
It's one of those that if you ever get a chance to see in a theater, it would be one of those experiences. I would say just do it because it would be fun. I mean, there's also an earnestness to this, even though it's cheesy. That's something that's kind of unique to disaster movies, and this movie leans heavy into that. So
Oh, again, it's a movie that is aware that it is the third entry in the franchise. It is aware that none of the main players are back again. We don't have John Williams involved. Like, this is a movie that is just coasting on the name and the name only. And, again, as flawed as it is at points, because I mean, there's a lot of movie logic, of course, but I have to tip my hat to at least they were willing to do something somewhat different here. And again, I think maybe it's just because of what ultimately follows this movie that this movie kind of gets a free pass in a way, which, sometimes that's all you need. That's all you need.
no, yeah, sometimes that's all it is. And again, I think if you go into it with the mindset of having a good time and just sort of, watching a a movie that's very self-aware, and everybody in it is, there's something to be enjoyed here with this one for sure.
No, Jaws 3 definitely has that in spades. It is an enjoyable film. You may need some alcohol just for the hell of it. If you really want to have a good time with it, I might say, if you are inclined to have a nice beverage, because it will enhance the experience. I can attest to
I,
that,
I
ladies
will
and
also
gentlemen.
say if you can get a group of people around and you're all having a good time or whatever, like it's a good, like if you want to have like the quote bad movie night with
Right.
friends and stuff, like you can do a lot worse than this. Like you can have some fun with this one. So,
Oh no, we're not talking a Halloween Resurrection here,
oh
or
no.
or we're not talking Jaws the Revenge. So again, apples and oranges here, folks. But
Yes, very much.
no, Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D, as it of course was called at the time of its release. Have you seen it, folks? What are your thoughts on this seminal entry? Really, it is a film that people seem to almost forget that it does exist because it's sort of overshadowed by the previous sequel and obviously what unfortunately followed in 1987. But I am curious your thoughts, everybody, if you have seen Jaws 3. Let me know, and certainly let Jay know as well. Jay, I have to ask before we wrap this up, because it does seem like shark movies, for better or for worse, are with us. They are here to stay. It's the shark bite we can't seem to clean up, if you will. We can't shake it. Um, I guess, do you have any favorite modern shark movies? And would you ever want to see a quote legacy sequel to Jaws? And again, not saying you would bring him back
Mhm.
Richard Dreyfuss or Lorraine Gary at this point, but would you want to see something continued in this particular franchise?
I'll answer that part first, and the answer to that is an emphatic no. I would not want to see a legacy sequel of this because I don't think it would work. I really don't. I don't know how you would make it work. And Peter Benchley said up until his death, and his estate has continued to say like you couldn't make it nowadays because we know so much more about sharks in large part because of Jaws, which is the ironic part is that the thing that villainized the shark made us study it more, made us learn more about it, turned on a generation of people to doing that. And which is amazing. And you see what incredible creatures they are. So I wouldn't want to see one because I think it would be too caught up in we have to be accurate and we can't do this and that. There's just too many things to fall into. it's better off to live in the kind of the place it is now, which is sort of the Sharknado land and stuff. But I do think there are shark movies that work. And I'll give you three more modern ones that I think work. There was a very, very low budget movie called Open Water that came out, oh gosh, it's almost been 15, 20 years ago, I guess now. I saw that in theaters when it came out. My wife bought it for me when it came out on DVD because we both were really affected by it. We thought it was really well done. It's a movie where sharks occur. It's not a movie about sharks. But they're just in it, but it's pretty good. A cheesy one that's a lot of fun from 2011 is a movie called Shark Night. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but Sarah Paxton's in it, and Catherine McPhee, and Donald Logue, and a few other familiar faces. It's a fun David R. Ellis kind of cheeso fest. It lives in the same vein as this. If you want to double feature things like our friend Lindsay Wilkins would, Jaws 3D and Shark Night kind of live in the same place. And then The Shallows is a movie I happen to really like. It's really a movie about survival and someone dealing with a lot of stuff, and a shark happens to get by, and the shark does what sharks will do when it finds something bleeding nearby. It's going to wait until it can get a hold of it again. And to watch Blake Lively have to fight that thing is pretty wild. So it's well done. I like all this. The ending of it's a little crazy, but it's fun. I enjoy those as more modern shark movies.
Yeah, I'm very picky when it comes to shark movies. I mean, I think because Jaws did it so well, it is never far from my mind, and I have a hard time really separating the two. And maybe it's an unfair standard to hold any other subsequent film to, but for me, because Jaws is such a perfect movie and everything else sort of is almost laughable by comparison, I tend to sort of go for the over the top shark films at this point. I think of films like Deep Blue Sea, which I enjoy. I think of a film called, I believe it was Bait.
Oliver Bait,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was an, again, really, in your face and wild time. There's a tsunami, and of course shark gets into a like a grocery store or something like that. And then another one, which is actually probably the most serious, but it still is a little cheesy at points. It was this Australian film, I think from 2011 or 12, called The Reef. And
I've seen that. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I found that to be kind of an effective gripping movie where they
Mhm.
actually used a lot of real life shark footage. I don't actually think they even have any either animatronic or digital sharks. It's all just composite footage put together, and it was actually surprisingly effective. I remember actually I was on vacation at the time, and then I saw it, and then the next day in the water, I was sort of having to do a double take, which
Yeah.
that's usually a testament. But yeah, I mean, Jaws is the gold standard as far as this subgenre is concerned, and I mean, God willing, they will never remake it. I mean, I fear that that day will eventually come and knock on our doorstep, but
I don't know.
hopefully,
I feel
hopefully
like
not.
I feel like there are some things that just because of when they were made and what they're about just can't be redone. Like another one I'll give you, and the people behind it will never let it be done because they've kind of written it into their wills and stuff. But like, there's no reason to remake Back to the Future. Like, it wouldn't work again, unless you did it as a period piece, and it would just seem like parody at that point. Like it wouldn't work because the sensibilities are different. It's
Right.
a different world. Jaws is the same way, and there are a lot of other movies that it's better that they don't try to remake them. In a
Right.
lot of ways. Like you and I are both big fans of Christopher Nolan and a lot of his work, and I happen to think like some of the mistake the DC universe has made is that they've tried to live in the Batman trilogy that he created when it really only those were the three films for that. They needed to
Right.
do something else afterward. They tried to keep doing that over and over again and to varying levels of not success up until recently. And so I think there are some things you just can't, not that they're sacred cows, but just it wouldn't make any sense to try to redo them because you can never recreate it. And what a testament, by the way, to the original Jaws, though. I mean, Steven Spielberg, I saw that most recent National Geographic documentary. They've done so many on Jaws. I happen to think like the 25th anniversary disc had one of the best docs ever about it. Everybody was
Oh
still
yeah.
young enough to not wallow too heavy in the nostalgia about it, but to really tell a lot about it. Steven was on that one a lot. But even listening to him on this one, I appreciate the fact that he's never shied away from the fact that this is what gave him a career. And
That's
that
yeah.
he made the gold standard in something, and he's done it so many times, which is sort of wild. He's kind of like the Michael Phelps of filmmakers. He just keeps setting records nobody will ever touch. But to think, his first big studio movie is the reason we have blockbusters these days. Like it laid all of that groundwork, and we're still trying to make that happen again without telling that story again, which is it's a testament to how well it works.
No, absolutely. And I mean, there's a whole other discussion to be had at some point about how Hollywood today is not cultivating the same kind of talent that we saw in the 1970s. You think of
Oh,
the
100%.
Lucases, the Ford Coppolas, the Spielbergs. I mean,
De
you know,
Palma,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, people look around and say, well, why don't we have good movies anymore or movies like back then? Well, it's because you don't have the same bench as you did back in the 1970s. I mean,
Mm-mm.
again, there are very few Christopher Nolans out there today. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, that, again, there's a whole other discussion to be
Yeah,
had.
well, there aren't though. I mean, like you say, there really aren't that many. There are a few that live
Yeah.
in a sphere and do things that I know for me, I will always attract my time and dollar, and I'll see what they do because I find them interesting, even if they don't always work for me. Like the Coen brothers are a good example of
Yeah.
that. That all their stuff doesn't necessarily play for me, but I'm probably going to give it a shot because more times than not, I'm going to find something I enjoy there, but yeah, we don't cultivate auteurs like we used to, not in the way we did back then, but and that's okay because that to me makes those films more special, like Jaws and The Godfather and things like that. It's you can't redo them.
No.
That's what makes them awesome.
Yeah.
Like you can't touch it, so why try?
No.
Just make new stuff, So which I'm always amazed at just how reverential people still are about that original Jaws. And that's why I say I'm so excited to finally get to see it in the big
Oh,
screen. I can't wait to catch that. So
well, I mean, I eagerly await your thoughts and reaction because I will be there. I'm going to see it in real 3D. I had a chance to see that a couple years ago when they did a re-release, and it's not Jaws 3D that I can tell you, but the transfer, and it was done under Spielberg's guidance. It's one of the most immersive experiences I have ever had, and the fact that we're now talking about a 50-year-old movie just again speaks to both the volume of the story itself, but the the technological prowess that even still holds up all these years later. So
yeah,
no, you're
you
in
know,
for a real treat, my friend.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, the thing about all these movies that ties them together to one another was that the effects never really worked. Like
Right.
they had to work around it all the time. Every filmmaker had to fight that in some way, and it made them try to find something else in the movie. The second movie had, even though they hated each other, Schwartz and Schneider were able to get a good performance from each
Yeah.
other. You had Roy Scheider to really anchor that movie. The third one had the kitschiness of the premise
Yeah.
to play with, and the fact that you had the cast that knew what they were doing.
Right.
And the fourth one had the novelty of having never been tried. I don't
Right.
know, but it had something happening. But anyway, that's another story, as we've said.
No, again, we've teased it enough. We'll definitely do Jaws: The Revenge at some point because
Yeah,
there's a lot to say on
break out
that
my
film.
paperback of the novelization
I was
again.
going to say that,
So,
yeah, we could do a discussion just on that whole exploit, which, I mean, who would think of a theatrical novelization would be that compelling? But there we go. That's what Jaws does, everybody.
I agree.
But no, this has been fun. Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D. This was the third film, the third dimension in Terra. Again, let me know, everybody, your thoughts on this film because certainly the first film, obviously, and the second film as the first sequel, and obviously the fourth film generate a lot of discussion. But Jaws 3 kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So I am curious to know your thoughts and reactions. And as well, if you are going to be catching Jaws for its re-release next week, that will be the topic for the episode. So really, we're really jumping the shark at this. We close out the summer here. But Jay, thank you again, my friend, for
Oh,
joining me for this discussion. Tell me, where can people find you and stalk you on social media in the best possible way? And again, please give a plug for your show.
I definitely will. And Phil, thank you again for having me. This was always, it's always great talking movies with you and really enjoy being a part of this show and love the work that you're doing here at Phil at the Movies. So thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. If folks want to follow the show, Film Strip Podcast is available wherever you find your fine podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon. We're on YouTube. We don't do live video yet, but we are playing with that idea again. But we do have all of our back catalog up, so check that out. Ron, Lindsay, and I have a good time doing that show, and we bring on a lot of different friends like Phil and several others to be a part of that. So we're rounding into our fall catalog and getting ready for our spooky season stuff and everything that we're going to do. But we have a lot of fun and enjoy that. You can find that show, Film Strip Pod, is our handle on all the social media. And if you want to follow me, it's at JRanHere. You can just find me, and I post about really about three things: movies, podcasts I'm listening to, usually about movies I'm watching, or something to do with running, and occasionally random sports takes. But that's kind of my world. But again, Phil, thank you so much for having me, and really enjoyed this. And it's fun to get to talk about a movie that's near and dear to my heart, even if it is a big cheesy piece of popcorn. But I enjoyed it again, my friend. Thank you.
Well, anytime, like I said, the mic is always open here, so please don't be a stranger. We'll definitely have you back sooner rather than later. I know we have some Christopher Nolan films on the docket to talk about in the new year, but we'll certainly have you on beforehand and have another spirited discussion, I'm sure. But that does it for me today, everybody. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Again, give Jay's show, Film Strip Pod, a listen and a subscription because from one film fan to another, I can attest they really do fantastic work. They're film-tastic work, and it's always in my feed whenever a new episode pops up. But on that note, everybody, be well, go support your local theater, and I'll be back next week where we'll do this all over again for the love of movies.
Movies makes every movie a dream.